The machines whispered in measured rhythm, a mechanical lullaby for an aging body unwilling to rest. I counted the beeps because they sounded almost human, steadier than promises, more faithful than family holidays. The nurse stopped by with that gentle tone nurse is perfect, smoothing the blanket as she said, "Your family couldn't make it today." I smiled, as if absence were routine. Of course, I knew where they were. The screen of my phone confirmed it, my daughter framed by a sunset, my son mid-laugh beside a buffet table, their captions painted in cheerful excess. The ocean glittered behind them, mercilessly alive. My hand trembled as I scrolled, the four-line quivering like punctuation to my thoughts. Funny, I'd built lectures around empathy, how stories teach us to imagine others. Now my own story was unread. Maybe to understand that week, you'd need to know what our family used to be. I live in a small seaside town where mornings begin with the cry of gulls and end with the hush of tides. The streets know me by routine, same bench by the pier, same coffee from Mrs. Hahn's bakery, same slow nod to the postman who still calls me sir. I spent 40 years teaching literature at the high school 2 blocks from here. Words were my currency, I bought meaning with them, traded weariness for wonder. When my wife, Lila, passed from cancer 30 years ago, language became my anchor. Alex was 15 then, Maya 12. I remember promising them that love, like a well-built sentence, should endure careful pauses. We used to read together every Sunday after fishing, 3 chairs on the porch, the scent of salt and ink mingling. I'd quiz them from poems and reward correct answers with laughter and fresh lemonade. Those were years stitched with modest joy, birthdays baked in the same oven, winters warmed by shared blankets and borrowed library books. I taught classes by day and graded papers by night, sometimes taking tutoring jobs to keep tuition dreams payable. I never saw any of it as sacrifice, only continuity. Time, however, wears gentle disguises. Alex married into ambition early, a stockbroker with more passwords than patience. Maya turned travel into performance, her camera forever following applause. Their visits arrived in neatly edited bursts, 3-day weekends around scheduling gaps, hotel stays instead of my guest room. I pretended understanding. Who was I to grudge success? Pride and loneliness can share the same heartbeat, and mine learned that rhythm well. They called often at first, voices crisp over wireless distance. Then work intervened, calls shortened to just checking in, Dad. Birthdays brought couriered gadgets and cards printed, not written. Next month, they'd promise, we'll drive down. I recognized the verse long before they finished it. I told myself this is what modern love looks like, efficient, convenient, almost caring. My own life folded into quiet repetition. I found peace in predictability, watering the roses, mending school essays for ex-students now grown into teachers themselves. On Wednesdays I volunteered at the library, slipping recommended books into young hands uncertain of what to read next. In those moments, I felt part of something breathing. Evenings were spent tending my small garden, lavender, and time replacing Lila's vanished roses. Sometimes I'd imagine her approval in the wind. Yet silence crept in where laughter once sat. Meals for one have their own sound, the scrape of cutlery, the clock ticking too loud. Still, I never called it loneliness, teachers dislike mislabeling. The day before my stroke, I stood in the grocery aisle balancing jars of fruit, comparing sugar content for Maya's favorite jam. She'd mentioned it in passing during a video call, "Dad, your jam ruined me for supermarket brands." I'd smiled at the compliment, storing it like a coin in a nearly empty jar. That morning, sunlight spilled across the produce section, ripening memory with every reflection. I remember thinking how love often hides in these small preparations, an ordinary purchase that feels like history repeating itself. I stalked the peaches, walked home whistling an old classroom tune, and placed the jar beside the stove, ready to begin. My body, however, had other lessons to teach. Then, that Thursday morning, my arm went numb, and the world tilted sideways. When I opened my eyes the second morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds like thin pages turned by an invisible reader. The doctor came in with the expression of someone trained to balance good news and statistics. You were lucky, he said, adjusting my chart. A minor stroke. With therapy, you'll recover. Patience is key. The word patience felt ironic coming from someone younger than my son. He added that my emergency contact hadn't answered. After several tries, a neighbor had finally picked up. I thanked him, though the gratitude came tangled with shame I couldn't quite justify. The nurse brought my phone. My fingers trembled as I scrolled to Alex's number. The ringtone was long enough for a memory, his graduation day, my applause echoing louder than the auditorium's. Then his voice, brisk as always. Dad, we're about to board. It's just 1 week, remember? You'll be fine by the time we're back. Behind him I heard horns, laughter, a voice asking about champagne. I said, take care, son. He replied, love you, Dad, words emptied by hurry. The call ended before disbelief could fully form. I tried Maya next. She answered with a brightness bordering on guilt, oh, Dad, you scared us. But it's a mild one, right? Anyway, we're only gone 7 days. I'll bring souvenirs. Promise. I imagined her leaning against some glossy railing, the world gliding by in pictures taken for followers I didn't know. I whispered that I was proud of her and hung up before my voice betrayed me. For a while I stared at the muted phone. Pride and pain can coexist, one keeps you upright, the other keeps you awake. The nurse though. My tears were from the medication, I didn't correct her. Through the week, my visitors consisted of white coats, measured smiles, and the neighbor who brought me figs from her garden. Each day a text arrived, how are you? We'll make it up when we're back. The punctuation sparkled with exclamation points, as if enthusiasm were empathy's twin. I replied with polite gratitude and a photo of the fig bowl, pretending abundance. At night the monitors ticked toward morning while I stared at the ceiling's slow-moving shadows. In those sleepless hours, I remembered every time my children had introduced me as our dad, he's a teacher, retired now. I used to fill the pause with pride, they'd achieved so much. But lying there, I felt the gap widening between description and connection. They spoke of independence as if love were an outdated technology, something functional but obsolete. I pictured Alex giving motivational talks about self-discipline, Maya filming inspirational reels about chasing dreams. I had applauded their pursuits, now I recognized the cost of applause when it replaces conversation. Their success sounded, suddenly, like distance wearing a medal. On the 4th day, the doctor commented on my steady improvement. I nodded, pretending to listen, but my thoughts compiled themselves into a lecture no student would hear, how modern gratitude compresses into emojis, how affection outsourced to schedules becomes performance. If I'd written it on the blackboard, perhaps it would have looked like this, love, presence equals fiction. The equation settled somewhere deep, heavier than the 4-line in my wrist. That evening, I opened the small journal my neighbor had brought from home. Its pages smelled faintly of lavender from Lila's drawer sachets. I wrote slowly, letters measured to the rhythm of the heart monitor, they boarded the cruise. I boarded solitude. The sentence looked dignified, almost literary, yet inside it pulsed resignation. When visiting hours ended, the nurse dimmed the room. Rest, she said softly. I pretended to close my eyes. In darkness, I made silent promises, none about revenge, none about teaching lessons. Only this, I would stop waiting for their apologies to define my peace. Then, when the discharge papers came and my neighbor offered a ride home, I accepted with an ease that felt like letting go. Released from the hospital, I quietly began the process of erasing, not through revenge, but through reclamation. Rehabilitation became my new curriculum, one that required no classroom, only breath and stubbornness. Each morning I walked the pier with a cane that clicked like punctuation on the wooden planks. Gull cries and salt wind marked progress better than any stopwatch. At first, 50 steps drained me, by spring I doubled them. Repetition builds strength, my speech therapist said. I smiled and added quietly, it also rebuilds patience. Afternoons I spent at the youth center, where mismatched chairs and restless hearts filled the air with noise I had missed. I started a small reading program for teens who considered books the language of strangers. One boy, David, stayed after class to ask about metaphors. His curiosity reminded me of Alex at 12. I lent him my copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. He later returned it with annotations that glowed like small lanterns between the lines. What began as service turned into mutual salvation. Teaching had always been my profession, but now it felt like respiration, necessary, rhythmic, alive. I sold the family house that once echoed with too much silence. Its rooms had grown cavernous with memory. The real estate agent asked if I was sure. Absolutely, I said. A home should be lived in, not curated. I moved into a small cottage near my old school. The cottage kept humble company, sea breeze, wild thyme, and the distant toll of church bells marking hours I no longer feared wasting. Freed from excess, I turned tidy with intention. I changed my emergency contacts, the neighbor first, the youth center next, closing a chapter, not in bitterness but completion. The will took longer. Lawyers prefer punctuation exactness, and I insisted the words convey warmth rather than reprimand. My modest savings and pension would go to the literacy program, to fund scholarships and reading corners, so that some future David might find voice before bitterness found him. When I signed the papers, I felt lighter, as if releasing inherited gravity. At night, I wrote letters to Alex and Maya. Each began differently but ended alike, with affection, honesty, and boundaries. I thanked them for the good years, acknowledged the difficult distance, admitted my own failings in staying silent too often. I described my newfound peace, sprinkled with small humor. Your father has traded cholesterol for characterization exercises. Writing these letters became therapy's extension. They taught my hand control and my mind composure. I sealed each envelope, dated it, and placed it in a drawer. Unsent forgiveness is still forgiveness, merely waiting for the right reader. Outside, the garden changed character. Lila's roses, fussy in their demand for perfection, had long surrendered to weather. I replaced them with lavender, quieter, sturdier, undeterred by neglect. Their scent drifted in through the open kitchen window, mingling with tea and ink, a gentle symbol of resilience over sentiment. Visitors often commented on the calmness of the cottage. I would laugh softly. It's cheaper than therapy. I'd reply, though privately I believed therapy lived in every rooted stem. Through the youth center and town gatherings, I discovered the companionship of usefulness. People addressed me by name again, not as a relative of someone else. They respected my steadiness, not my stories. When David confessed he might drop out of school, I recited a line I once taught his predecessors: courage isn't the absence of fear, it's continuing despite it. He stayed enrolled. In time, the boy began calling me Sir Les and Mr. W. Moore. It sounded like belonging. A full year passed before I realized how far recovery had taken me. My limp softened, my solitude matured into composure. The mirror no longer showed frailty but a kind of disciplined grace. Then, one autumn morning, while sorting through routine emails, a subject line froze me mid-sip of tea: Family Cruise Reunion, sponsored by Maya Travels. My finger hovered above the trackpad, uncertain whether to open it or delete it unread. The cursor blinked like an impatient question. I hesitated, then destiny, as it often does, intervened. News travels differently when it carries your child's name. I first learned of Maya's trouble through a newspaper left on a cafe counter, the sort of headline that trembles with gossip disguised as business. Cruise line collapse leaves investors adrift. Her company, Maya Travels, had chartered the voyage. An administrative tangle over property rights halted reimbursements. I read the article twice before recognizing one familiar phrase in small print: the disputed assets belonged to a local foundation. My foundation. The day of the press conference arrived windless and gray. Television vans lined the town hall square, microphones angled like accusing fingers. I didn't plan to attend, yet some instinct stronger than pride guided my cane through the doors. I took a seat in the back row, where echo softened faces into anonymity. Maya stepped onto the stage wearing composure like armor, camera R. Edie, immaculate, but pale. She thanked the reporters, reciting prepared statements about partnership misunderstandings. Then someone asked who actually owned the building central to the lawsuit. Papers rustled. For the first time, I saw hesitation cross her features. The legal proprietor, she said slowly, is a trust known as the Wallace Education and Trades Foundation, registered last year. Reporters began typing. Another question, who is the trustee? Her assistant whispered something she clearly hadn't expected. I watched recognition bloom, not the pleasant kind. Her voice faltered. According to records, the trustee is an individual named E.H. Wallace. Silence thickened. Cameras pivoted. I felt their collective turn like a tide shifting direction. Maya's eyes scanned the hall and found me. Even from a distance she recognized the initials, the modest posture, the unassuming cane. In that suspended instant, the story changed authorship. She walked toward me through a corridor of murmurs. Reporters stepped back, scenting drama. You own this? She whispered when she reached me. I nodded, carefully, because some truths deserve gentle delivery. Own? I said quietly. Only enough to ensure fair wages and honest books. Her mascara trembled more than her voice. Why didn't you tell me? Because it wasn't meant as a lesson, I answered. A lesson condemns. This was a correction of imbalance. I explained, softly enough that microphones would catch only the tone, not the words. After my stroke, I had used part of my estate to build the foundation, to support education, local trades, and small tourism businesses that treated workers decently. When her company's crisis began, several displaced employees had found work through that same trust. What she saw as ownership was, in truth, stewardship. Her composure cracked, revealing the daughter beneath the executive. You saved them. No, I said. They saved themselves, given a chance someone once gave me. They came. Rasp clicked like mechanical applause. I waved them away. This wasn't a spectacle, though the world insisted on one. Just then Alex entered, slightly rumpled, the confident veneer replaced by unease. His own firm had recently collapsed, a rumor that preceded him like smoke. He approached slowly, realizing that the man he'd pitted for fragility now anchored the entire room. Dad, he began, voice small, I didn't know you could, still learn? I finished for him, smiling. Recovery teaches more than success ever did. I turned to both of them. I erased you from my paperwork, not from my heart. But hearts, like bodies, need recovery time. The sentence landed heavier than intended, but truth rarely travels light. Reporters craned forward, waiting for an outburst or embrace. None came. I simply rested both hands on my cane and let stillness settle until clicking shutters grew embarrassed by their own persistence. Maya looked down, drawing in breath as though preparing to dive. You always said empathy isn't a theory, she murmured. It's an action, I replied. Sometimes silent. When the officials resumed questions, I quietly made for the exit. Behind me I heard neither applause nor confrontation, only my children standing in awkward pause, their futures slightly rearranged by recognition. Outside, the air was cold enough to sting, familiar enough to heal. I watched the gray clouds drift apart just enough to admit a blade of sunlight. Success had been the language they spoke fluently, humility was the dialect they were learning now. Press conference ended, but silence between us lingered, each of us confronting reflection more painful than any scolding could manage. In the weeks after the press conference, the rhythm of my cottage changed. One Saturday morning, a car door closed outside, tentative as a question. When I opened the gate, Maya stood there clutching a grocery bag instead of her phone. You said lavender tea helps you sleep, she murmured. The bag rustled. Why? Vegetables, bread, and 2 unfamiliar brands of humility. I invited her in. Conversation limped at first, words bumped into silences neither of us knew how to fill. Still, she brewed the tea, and we drank it, awkward but present. Alex appeared the next weekend, toolbox in hand. The gate squeaks, he said, avoiding my eyes. He spent 3 hours adjusting hinges that had waited a decade for his attention. The creak vanished, guilt loosened a little. We spoke about weather, sports, anything that didn't bruise. Repentance, I discovered, sometimes hides in practical tasks. I kept my boundaries like well-tended hedges, neither shutting them out nor forcing closeness. We met on neutral ground, cups of coffee, short walks, shared silence. They began listening to my stories about the youth center and my favorite students. When I spoke of David and his scholarship applications, Maya smiled genuinely. "You sound happy, Dad." I corrected her gently, "Content is closer." At first, they sought reassurances I couldn't offer. I told them that trust resembled muscle after stroke. It relearns movement slowly, stiffly, then almost naturally. They nodded, perhaps expecting bitterness. I kept only truth. No vengeance, no grandeur. Just the labor of forgiveness, practiced daily like physical therapy. Little gestures became our quiet redemption, Alex leaving the gate oiled and swinging freely, Maya rinsing mugs before departure. Tiny domestic kindnesses replaced years of formal gifts. Sometimes they came together, sometimes alone. The cottage adjusted around their hesitant laughter until even silence felt companionable. Inside me, contradictions wrestled for dominance. Part of me longed to lecture them about neglect, another part feared losing this fragile renewal. Grace, I learned, demanded greater strength than anger ever had. It required showing up, even when pride preferred retreat. Each visit tested that truth. Resentment would have been effortless, but effort, sustained, humble, was healing's real language. Winter arrived early that year. The three of us shared soup one evening while the wind rattled the shutters. Alex ladled portions carefully, as though serving penance. Maya adjusted my scarf before leaving, motherly despite her guilt. We didn't speak apologies or forgiveness, we simply behaved as if both were underway. When I watched their car lights disappear beyond the bend, I felt neither triumph nor sadness, just a calm awareness that some repairs sound less like hammer strikes and more like breathing in unison. My reflection turned contemplative, about time, healing, and the quiet measure of love that no cruise can purchase. 2 years have unrolled like steady surf along the pier, predictable in rhythm, generous in lessons. My health has rebuilt itself to a comfortable truce. The cane gathers dust more often than it's used. Every Tuesday, the community reading room fills with the hum of stories being discovered. The Wallace Education and Trades Foundation, those initials that once felt like camouflage, now adorn the doorway without fanfare. Children read aloud there, mispronouncing courage and still managing to understand it. Alex and Maya visit often, quietly folding themselves into this new routine. They help with shelves, donations, raffles. No one recognizes them as the travelers of glossy magazines. Here, they are volunteers wearing name tags and humility in equal measure. There. Laughter has softened, it fits this place like sunlight through old glass. Trust remains cautious but alive, like a healed limb wary of overuse. Sometimes after closing hours, we sit among scattered chairs, sipping lukewarm tea while I grade essays or jot scholarship notes. I tell them small truths, how discipline restored more than therapy ever did. The stroke took half a year from my body, I tell them, but the neglect took years from my heart. Both could heal, with discipline. They listen without defense, which is its own apology. I never intended to punish them, I only stopped negotiating my worth. Love, I've learned, is less a contract than a current. When I ceased demanding reciprocity and simply allowed affection to flow where it would, peace answered with surprising consistency. Now, on calm mornings, I leave the cottage door ajar. They arrive without appointments, carrying scones or new benches for the garden. We work quietly until the sky blurs into evening. Perhaps this is redemption, not dramatic, but durable. I've come to understand that forgiveness isn't a key to let others in, it's a window we open to breathe again. They chose a cruise once, I chose a life that finally set its own course.